I'll be right with you, Your Majesty. But first, let me do a quick sound check. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, now let's talk about what you're dealing with. I know you have good people moving out of London because they're afraid of the people moving in. Why? I can tell you this, it's not because of the color of their skin. It's because of that bloodthirsty terrorist Jack Cade, who the Duke of York has sent here to create riots and anarchy in your kingdom. Your citizens want to run for cover, and if you want to run, run. But you sure can't hide or turn a blind eye to what the psychopath is up to. He believes in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He wants to be King of England. Do you know what he told the prisoners in London Tower? Vote for me, and I'll set you free. You even have young folks walking around with their heads in the sky, joining up with him as soon as he passes by them. Your Majesty, you've got cities ablaze in the summertime. So with fear in the air and tension everywhere, let's face it, we can't afford to go round and round and round. I say we go to the source and round up this militant troublemaker. Put a bounty on his head if you have to. Otherwise, where the world's headed, nobody knows. My lord, you can't just walk away from this problem. Do you understand that what you're going through is exactly what we're going through now? Where are you going? Oh, great Googa Mooga. Can't you hear me talking to you? Believe me, we're in the same boat. It's just a ball of confusion. How do I know? Because that's what the world is today. Hey, hey. In the 1987 pilot of the Star Trek The Next Generation television series entitled Encounter at Farpoint, I first heard Patrick Stewart as Captain Jean-Luc Picard quote a line from Shakespeare saying, "Kill all the lawyers." Little did I know at the time that this is the most famous line from Henry VI Part 2, and that 38 years later I would be using that same line to open the 25th episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. So let's take a look at the plot. The play opens with the marriage of King Henry VI of England to Margaret of Anjou. Margaret is a poor, young French woman and lover of William de la Pole, 4th Earl of Suffolk, who plans to influence King Henry through his wife. However, Lord Protector Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, is a major obstacle to Suffolk and Margaret's plan. Gloucester is very popular with the commoners and deeply trusted by Henry VI. Unfortunately, Gloucester's wife, Eleanor, is very ambitious and has designs on the throne for her husband. She's even led to dabble in black magic by John Hume, who, unbeknownst to her, is an agent of Suffolk's. She has a witch summon a spirit and demands that it reveal the future to her. Unfortunately, the prophecies are vague, and before the ritual is even finished, she's arrested. At court, she is then banished and sent to the Isle of Man, much to the great shame and embarrassment of her husband Gloucester. Suffolk then conspires with Cardinal Beaufort, Gloucester's enemy, and the Duke of Somerset to bring Gloucester to ruin. Suffolk accuses Gloucester of treason and has him imprisoned, but before Gloucester can even be tried, Suffolk sends 2 murderers to kill him in his bed. Meanwhile, Richard, the 3rd Duke of York, explains his claim to the throne to the Earls of Salisbury and Warwick, father and son respectively of the powerful Neville family, who pledged their support for Richard's claim. At the same time, Cardinal Winchester is riddled with guilt for having Gloucester assassinated. He contracts a fever and is plagued in a blood-curdling deathbed scene in which King Henry, Salisbury, and Warwick are chilled at the sight of his agony. The cardinal dies unrepentant and cursing God. Suffolk is banished for his role in Gloucester's death, whilst Margaret, horrified by Suffolk's banishment, vows to ensure his return. But the arrogant and pompous Suffolk is killed by pirates shortly after leaving England and his head sent back to the broken-hearted Margaret. Meanwhile, York is appointed commander of an army to put down a revolt in Ireland. But before he leaves, he reveals how he has enlisted the aid of a former officer of his named Jack Cade to stage a riotous revolt in order to see if the commoners will support York if he decides to make an open attempt at seizing the crown. At first, the rebellion is successful, and Cade names himself the mayor of London and causes massive bloodshed and rioting. But his rebellion is eventually put down when Lord Clifford, a loyal supporter of Henry, persuades the common people who make up Cade's army to abandon the cause. After going on the run, Cade is killed several days later by Alexander Iden, a Kentish gentleman into whose garden Cade climbs looking for food. Meanwhile, York returns to England with his army, claiming that he intends to protect the king from the duplicitous Somerset. However, York vows to disband his forces if Somerset is arrested and charged with treason. Initially, Buckingham swears that Somerset is already in prison in the Tower, but when Somerset unexpectedly walks in, accompanied by Queen Margaret, York accuses Buckingham and the king of deceiving him and announces his claim to the throne, supported by his sons, Edward and Richard. The English nobility takes sides, with some supporting the House of York and others supporting Henry and the House of Lancaster. A battle is fought at St. Albans in which Somerset is killed by York's son Richard and Lord Clifford by York. With the battle lost, Margaret persuades the troubled king to flee from the battlefield and head to London. She's joined by young Clifford, who bravely vows revenge on the Yorkists for his father's death. The play concludes with York, Edward, Richard, Warwick, and Salisbury setting out in pursuit of Henry, Margaret, and Clifford. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable characters in Henry VI Part 2. All right, now let's take a look at some of the characters in this play. Two different sources I researched said that Henry VI Part 2 contains more characters than any other Shakespeare play. With that in mind, let's just look at some of the major characters and their significance. We'll start off with Henry VI himself. We first saw him in Henry VI Part 1, but now he's about to marry Margaret of Anjou. The initial thought was that she would bring peace and unity between England and France. However, the union had just the opposite effect. The first problem was that the arrangements were made by the Earl of Suffolk, who put his own selfish motives ahead of his country's. Even though he's already married, he falls in love with Margaret and would do anything to bring her to England. That includes giving away Anjou and Maine as part of the marriage agreement, which also included no dowry. Now, while this might be a good deal for Suffolk, and even Margaret, who reciprocates his love, it was a terrible deal for King Henry and England. In addition to losing valuable territories in France, it truly painted Henry as an ineffectual leader and a terrible decision-maker. And as we will see, that while Henry is a weak leader, Margaret is a strong, shrewish, domineering personality with lots of ambition. And speaking of ambition, we have Eleanor, the Duchess of Gloucester, who is not satisfied to be the second highest lady in England. She's willing to use black magic to prophesy what will happen to those who stand between her and her husband Gloucester getting the throne. Now, Duke Humphrey of Gloucester is Henry V's youngest brother and Henry VI's uncle. At the beginning of the play, he's still the protector of the realm, but now that Henry's come of age to marry and rule, his enemies call for him to resign that post. His chief enemy is his uncle Cardinal Beaufort of Winchester, who is anything but holy, and along with Margaret, Somerset, and Suffolk, sees to it that Gloucester is murdered. Richard, the Duke of York, has his eye on the throne, and despite the fact that he will do anything to get it, he does have a slightly stronger claim to the throne than Henry VI. But he lacks sufficient means to achieve the throne, and so he seeks out the support of the Nevilles, the powerful father and son earls of Salisbury and Warwick respectively. And just to make sure that he can position himself to come to England's rescue, he recruits a homicidal maniac named Jack Cade to stir up a bloody rebellion in England and cause widespread rioting and murder in Henry's realm. When we get back, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes from Henry VI, Part 2. As we know from the previous Shakespeare plays we've looked at, if he uses a prophecy, it's going to come true. However, they're not always as clear-cut as the hearers suspect. For example, the first prophecy says that the Duke yet lives that Henry shall depose, but him outlive and die a violent death. We know that in Henry VI, Part 3, the Duke of York will be killed and beheaded after trying to depose Henry. The second prophecy says of the Duke of Suffolk, by water shall he die and take his end. Well, he does die aboard a pirate ship at the hands of a pirate named Walter Whitmore. So Suffolk doesn't know if the prophecy meant Walter or water, but in either case, he still meets his end. I also want to point out that Shakespeare used pirates as plot devices in Hamlet, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and Antony and Cleopatra. However, this is the only one of these plays in which we actually see them kill anyone. The third prophecy about the Duke of Somerset says, let him shun castles. Safer shall he be upon the sandy plains than where castles mounted stand. This is the vaguest of the three prophecies because he's actually killed by Richard under an alehouse sign that reads, the Castle in St. Albans. Shakespeare also used assassins in this play, although we never learn their names. Assassins are good when there's dirty work to be done and you don't want to get your own hands dirty. Shakespeare also used assassins like James Tyrrell and others in Richard III and Macbeth, not to mention some unsuccessful assassins like Hubert in The Life and Death of King John, Faliard and Leonine in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and Camillo in The Winter's Tale. Dame Eleanor Cobham, who is Gloucester's second wife, falls into a trap set by Suffolk. Shakespeare also used this same plot device in Titus Andronicus when Aaron frames Quintus and Mardius for the death of Bassianus, and of course, there's the infamous betrayal trap by Prince John of Lancaster in the Forest of Gautreks in Henry IV, Part 2. But while Titus's sons were innocent, Eleanor was not. Listen to her words in Act 1, Scene 2, when she says in a soliloquy, follow I must, I cannot go before, while Gloucester bears this base and humble mind. Were I a man, a duke and next of blood, I would remove these tedious stumbling blocks and smooth my way upon their headless necks. And, being a woman, I will not be slack to play my part in fortune's pageant. Gloucester's wife and Suffolk are both banished, but that's not an unfamiliar plot in a Shakespeare play. There's also Lucius in Titus Andronicus, Romeo, Coriolanus, Posthumus in Cymbeline, Valentine in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Henry Bolingbroke, Thomas Mowbray, and Exeter in Richard II, Sir John Fastolf in Henry VI, Part 1, Sir John Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 2, Duke Senior and Rosalind in As You Like It, Alcibiades in Timon of Athens, Kent in King Lear, and Arcite in The Two Noble Kinsmen. In Act 3, Scene 3, we have one of the most memorable scenes, which is the death of Cardinal Beaufort or Winchester. He says that he'll confess to having his nephew Gloucester killed, but he never does. Instead, he dies a horrifying, remorseless, and tortured death. In fact, when Henry first sees him, he says, "Ah, what a sign it is of evil where death's approach is seen so terrible." Winchester then writhes in agony and says, "Bring me unto my trial when you will. Died he not in his bed? Where should he die? Can I make men live whether they will or no? Oh, torture me no more, I will confess. Alive again? Then show me where he is. I'll give £1,000 to look upon him. He hath no eyes, the death had blinded them. Comb down his hair. Look, look, it stands upright, like lime twigs set to catch my winged soul. Give me some drink, and bid the apothecary bring the strong poison that I bought of him." Henry says, "Peace to his soul. If God's good pleasure be, Lord Cardinal, if thou thinkest on heaven's bliss, hold up thy hand, make signal of thy hope." At that moment the cardinal dies, and Henry compassionately says, "He dies and makes no sign. O God, forgive him." Warwick exclaims, "So bad a death argues a monstrous life," and Henry responds, "Forbear to judge, for we are sinners all." The death of Suffolk in Act 4, Scene 1 is also quite disturbing, but it's hard to feel any remorse for him because he's completely arrogant, obnoxious, and condescending to his captives, even taunting them to put him to death. He's beheaded, and his head is sent back to England to the Queen, who mourns for him. And finally, there's Jack Cade's uprising, which starts in Act 4, Scene 2. He's a bloodthirsty mercenary hired by the Duke of York to stir up riots in England so that York can find out if the commoners would support his own claim to the throne. Cade comes across as bloodthirsty and unstable, and all of his scenes are splattered with unspeakable violence and horror. When we return, we'll look at some of the major themes that run through Henry VI, Part 2. As with most of Shakespeare's history plays, political ambition is in the forefront of much of the turmoil. In Henry VI, Part 2, we have the Duke of York, who will stop at nothing to become the King of England. We have Margaret, who enters England as a naive 15-year-old woman about to marry the king, and is transformed as she becomes disillusioned with Henry's inability to lead a country. Here she is confiding in her lover, the Duke of Suffolk, and lamenting how insignificant she feels as a queen. This is Act 1, Scene 3. "My Lord of Suffolk, say, is this the guise, is this the fashions in the court of England? Is this the government of Britain's isle, and this the royal of Albion's king? What? Shall King Henry be a pupil still under the surly Gloucester's governance? Am I a queen in title and in style, and must be made a subject to a duke? I tell thee, Pole, when in the city Tours thou rannest a tilt in honor of my love, and stolest away the ladies' hearts of France, I thought King Henry had resembled thee in courage, courtship, and proportion. But all his mind is bent to holiness, to number Ave Maris on his beads. His champions are the prophets and apostles, his weapons holy saws of sacred writ. His study, his tilt-yard, and his loves are brazen images of canonized saints. I would the College of Cardinals would choose him pope, and carry him to Rome, and set the triple crown upon his head. That were a state fit for his holiness." Of course, Margaret's contempt is not solely limited to her husband. We also see that she's willing to conspire with Suffolk and Cardinal Beaufort to kill the good Duke of Gloucester. There's also no shortage of self-interest in this play. After Gloucester is assassinated, Henry banishes Suffolk for his treachery, but neither Margaret nor Suffolk has any remorse for killing Gloucester. Instead, they're only concerned that they cannot continue their adulterous relationship behind the back of the unsuspecting king. And like Lady Macbeth, it seems far more important to the Duchess of Gloucester that her husband becomes king than it does to him. And the mercenary Jack Cade seems content with wreaking havoc on England, knighting himself, declaring himself the mayor of London, and instituting the rule of communism throughout the land in which whatever he says goes. Many of the characters in this play have ulterior motives. For example, the Duke of York very much believes that he should be king and will stop at nothing until he's crowned. At the end of Henry VI, Part 1, Suffolk told us that his plans were to influence Margaret, who would in turn influence Henry, so that Suffolk would essentially have great influence over England. Of course, we didn't know then that he was willing to kill the Duke of Gloucester in order to accomplish his goals. And then we have the haughty Cardinal Beaufort, the Bishop of Winchester, who indicates that he wants as great a role in England as the king, but seems to be more determined to kill his nephew Gloucester than anything else. In fact, it's his hatred of Gloucester that consumes him and leads to his own grisly death shortly after his nephew's assassination. Ironically, we see examples of patriotism exhibited by Jack Cade, who accuses Lord Say of giving away Normandy, and the pirates, who behead Suffolk for selling out England, killing Gloucester, accepting Margaret's worthless dowry, and giving up Anjou and Maine. But perhaps the best example of patriotism is from Duke Humphrey of Gloucester, who is known as the Good Duke because he was purely focused on the protection of the realm. Here he is in Act 1, Scene 1, completely outraged by what he sees happening in his country and in the lost territories in France. Here he is speaking to the nobles. Brave peers of England, pillars of the state, to you Duke Humphrey must unload his grief, your grief, the common grief of all the land. What? Did my brother Henry spend his youth, his valor, coin, and people in the wars? Did he so often lodge in open field, in winter's cold and summer's parching heat, to conquer France, his true inheritance? And did my brother Bedford toil his wits to keep by policy what Henry got? Have you yourselves, Somerset, Buckingham, brave York, Salisbury, and victorious Warwick, received deep scars in France and Normandy? Or hath mine uncle Beaufort and myself, with all the learned counsel of the realm, studied so long, sat in the council house, early and late, debating to and fro, how France and Frenchmen might be kept in awe, and had his highness in his infancy crowned in Paris in despite of foes? And shall these labors and these honors die? Shall Henry's conquest, Bedford's vigilance, your deeds of honor, and all our counsel die? O peers of England, shameful is this league, fatal this marriage, cancelling your fame, blotting your names from books of memory, razing the characters of your renown, defacing monuments of conquered France, undoing all, as all had never been. And let's not forget that it's the words of Lord Clifford who invokes the patriotic memory of Henry V that caused Cade's followers to abandon him. When we return, we'll look at some of Shakespeare's most powerful lines in the play. Duke Humphrey is one of the noblest characters in the entire play, but he's set upon by the king's enemies to get him out of the way. This is what he tells Henry VI in Act 3, Scene 1, after Suffolk arrests Gloucester on trumped-up charges of high treason. Ah, gracious Lord, these days are dangerous. Virtue is choked with foul ambition, and charity chased hence by rancor's hand. Foul subordination is predominant, and equity exiled in your highness's land. I know their complot is to have my life, and if my death might make this island happy and prove the period of their tyranny, I would expend it with all willingness. But mine is made the prologue to their play. For thousands more as yet suspect no peril, will not conclude their plotted tragedy. Beaufort's red sparkling eyes blab his heart's malice, and Suffolk's cloudy brow his stormy hate. Sharp Buckingham unburdens with his tongue the envious load that lies upon his heart, and dogged York that reaches at the moon, whose overweening arm I have plucked back, by false accuse doth level at my life. And you, my sovereign lady, with the rest causeless, have laid disgraces on my head, and with your best endeavour have stirred up my liefest liege to be mine enemy. I, all of you, have laid your heads together, myself had notice of your conventicles, and all to make away my guiltless life. I shall not want false witness to condemn me, nor store of treasons to augment my guilt. The ancient proverb will be well effected. A staff is quickly found to beat a dog. I also want to look at some of Jack Cade's rhetoric in Act 4, Scene 2. as he attempts to legitimize his credibility to lead. Notice how Dick the Butcher provides faint praise and clarifications of Cade's phony claims. Cade begins, "My father was a Mortimer." Dick says, "He was an honest man and a good bricklayer." Cade, "My mother a Plantagenet." Dick, "I know her well. She was a midwife." Cade, "My wife, descended of the Lacys." Dick, "She was indeed a peddler's daughter and sold many laces." Smith the Weaver adds, "But now of late, not able to travel with her furred pack, she washes bucks here at home." Cade, "Therefore am I of an honorable house." Dick, "Aye, by my faith, the field is honorable, and there was he born under a hedge, for his father never had a house but a cage." Cade, "Valiant I am." Smith, "He must needs, for beggary is valiant." Cade, "I am able to endure much." Dick says, "No question of that, for I have seen him whipped 3 market days together." Also, in Act 4, Scene 2, we have the most famous line from the play when Dick the Butcher says, "The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers." And finally, Smith the Weaver attempts to give Cade more credibility by saying, "Sir, he made a chimney in my father's house, and the bricks are alive at this day to testify. Therefore deny it not." Who says bloody psychopaths can't provide comic relief? When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points from Henry VI Part 2, along with some correlations to the other Shakespeare plays. I just want to point out 2 major turning points that greatly affect the outcome of the play. The first one takes place in Act 2, Scene 2, when the Duke of York gains the support of Salisbury and Warwick of the powerful Neville family. This lends York power, credibility, and momentum. The next one takes place in Act 3, Scene 2, when Duke Humphrey is assassinated in his bed as he sleeps. As a result, Henry VI loses his best and loyalist advisor. This also results in the banishment and eventual death of Suffolk, as well as his uncle Winchester. Here is Henry realizing that Suffolk is a dangerous foe with his own agenda. This is Act 3, Scene 2. "What? Doth my Lord of Suffolk comfort me? Came he right now to sing a raven's note, whose dismal tune bereft my vital powers, and thinks he that the chirping of a wren, by crying comfort from a hollow breast, can chase away the first conceived sound? Hide not thy poison with such sugared words, lay not thy hands on me. Forbear, I say, their touch affrights me as a serpent's sting. Thou baleful messenger, out of my sight, upon thy eyeballs, murderous tyranny sits in grim majesty to fright the world. Look not upon me, for thine eyes are wounding. Yet do not go away. Come, basilisk, and kill the innocent gazer with thy sight. For in the shade of death I shall find joy. In life, but double death, now Gloucester's dead." This certainly is one of Henry's only moments of real strength and leadership in the entire play, followed by him actually banishing Suffolk a little later in the same scene. Gloucester's death also allows the unchecked Duke of York to recruit Jack Cade to mount rebellions in southeast England. In addition, Margaret is transformed from an innocent to a conspirator, and finally into a monstrous shrew. Everything that happens is all about her, and she grows more and more dominant and assertive while Henry becomes more passive, timid, and withdrawn. Now let's look at some of the many correlations to the other Shakespeare plays. Dame Eleanor Cobham, Duchess of Gloucester, is a super-ambitious woman, far more so than her husband, whom she is determined will be king, even if she has to employ dark forces to accomplish her goal. That is not at all unlike Lady Macbeth in Macbeth. Once again, we have prophecies, as we did in Macbeth, Henry IV Part 2, Richard III, Julius Caesar, The Winter's Tale, and Cymbeline. Beaufort sees Gloucester's ghost in his mind while lying on his deathbed. Macbeth saw Banquo's ghost, Brutus saw Julius Caesar's ghost, and Richard III saw multiple ghosts the day before he met his end. We have plenty of decapitated heads in this play as stage props, including Suffolk, Lord Say, his son-in-law James Cromer, and Jack Cade, who's most notably killed by Alexander Iden in his garden, or in other words, in the Garden of Iden. Sorry about that. We also have Cloten's severed head in The Winter's Tale, Ragazine's head in Measure for Measure, the Duke of Austria's head in The Life and Death of King John, Hastings' head in Richard III, and Quintus and Martius's heads in Titus Andronicus. I guess you could call that last one a doubleheader? Sorry. We saw a catfight between Helena and Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream. In Henry VI Part 2, we almost see Queen Margaret and Dame Eleanor come to blows after Margaret strikes her for not picking up her fan when commanded to do so. Ah, what might have been. Dame Eleanor is lured into a trap by the Duke of Suffolk and his agent John Hume. This is similar to what happened to Kieran and Demetrius in Titus Andronicus, and to Lord John Talbot in Henry VI Part 1 by the Countess d'Auvergne. However, unlike the others, Talbot escapes because he anticipated their treachery. In Act 4, Scene 9, Alexander Iden says, "Lord, who would live turmoiled in the court, and may enjoy such quiet walks as these? This small inheritance my father left me contenteth me, and worth a monarchy. I seek not to wax great by others' waning, or gather wealth. I care not with what envy. Suffice it that I have maintains my state, and sends the poor well pleased from my gate." This is similar to the musings of Duke Senior in As You Like It after he's banished and lives in the Forest of Arden. And finally, we have the touching love scene between Margaret, the Queen, and the Duke of Suffolk just before he's banished. Despite the fact that this is an adulterous relationship, it's obvious that the two of them very much love each other. This is similar to Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and even the parting scene of the unmarried Troilus and Cressida. We should note that none of these relationships were between married couples, and all of them ended badly for the participants. When we get back, we'll look at some interesting facts about Henry VI Part 2. While preparing for this episode, I did some research and I came across some interesting facts that I'd like to share with you. Henry VI Part 2 was written out of chronological order around 1594 before Part 1, and believe it or not, the original title was The First Part of the Contention of the Two Famous Houses of York and Lancaster, and the Death of the Good Duke Humphrey, and the True Tragedy of Richard Duke of York and the Good King Henry VI. They probably shortened it because they had trouble fitting it on the marquee. Shakespeare's primary source for Henry VI Part 2 was Edward Hall's The Union of the Two Noble and Illustrious Families of Lancaster and York, published in 1548. He also drew upon the second edition of Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles, published in 1587. Henry VI was born on December 6, 1421. He never met his father Henry V, who died 9 months later, and at that time Henry VI was appointed king. Henry V's brother John of Lancaster was appointed as Henry's first guardian, but when he died, Duke Humphrey, Henry V's youngest brother, took over the role and also became protector of the realm. Henry VI assumed full control of the government in 1437 when he was only 16 years old. He was described as timid, shy, deeply pious, and passive. He also founded both Eton College and King's College, Cambridge, and dedicated the buildings to the Virgin Mary. As an adult, Henry suffered from mental illness, possibly schizophrenia. In 1543, he suffered a mental breakdown, and his cousin Richard, the Duke of York, was appointed regent. Richard actually did have a legitimate claim to the throne, as he descended from Edward II's third son, and Henry descended from the fourth son. Unfortunately for Richard, he didn't go about pleading his case the right way. But despite his lack of leadership skills, Henry VI reigned for 39 years, from 1422 to to 1461, and then briefly again before his death in 1471. In 1445, he married Margaret of Anjou, the poor daughter of the King of Naples, who was only 15 years old at the time. Howard Spiva once elaborated on the most famous line in the play, saying, "My translation of Shakespeare's quote is, 'If you want tyrants to rule, first kill all the lawyers.'" Executions at the time were performed in different methods depending upon one's status. For example, beheadings or capital punishment was reserved for the nobles, lesser citizens were executed by hangings, and witches and heretics were burned. Shakespeare combined Cade's rebellion with facts from the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, also known as Wat Tyler's Rebellion, which was highly anti-intellectual. In reality, Cade's Rebellion was one of the first popular uprisings in England, which addressed legitimate abuses of power and government. As in the play, Jack Cade was slain on July 12, 1450, in a garden in which he had taken shelter, which was owned by Alexander Iden, who eventually became the future High Sheriff of Kent. And finally, comic Robin Williams once commented, "Shakespeare said kill all the lawyers. There were no agents then." When we get back, we'll look at some of the great actors in the 1983 BBC Shakespeare version of Henry VI Part 2. All right, now let's take a look at some of the great actors in the 1983 BBC Shakespeare version of Henry VI Part 2. Brace yourself because there sure are a lot of them. Peter Benson, who plays King Henry VI, also played the same role in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3 and in Richard III, all in 1983. He also played the second gravedigger in Hamlet in 1980 and Clown's assistant in The Winter's Tale in 1981. Anne Carroll, who plays Eleanor, Duchess of Gloucester, also played Joan Shore in Henry VI Part 3 in 1983. The outstanding Trevor Peacock, who plays Jack Cade and the Sheriff, also played Lord Talbot in Henry VI Part 1 in 1983. He also played Feste the Jester in Twelfth Night in 1980, Bolt in Pericles, Prince of Tyre in 1984, the title role in Titus Andronicus in 1985, and the first gravedigger in Mel Gibson's version of Hamlet in 1990. David Burke, who plays the Duke of Gloucester, and Dick the Butcher also played Gloucester in Henry VI Part 1, and Sir William Catesby in Richard III, all in 1983. He also played Camillo in The Winter's Tale in 1981. Julia Foster, who plays Margaret, also played the same role in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3 and in Richard III, all in 1983. Anthony Brown, who plays Walter Whitmore and Alexander Iden, also played the Duke of Burgundy in Henry VI Part 1, Sir John Montgomery and Louis the King of France in Henry VI Part 3, and Sir Richard Ratcliffe in Richard III, all in 1983. Paul Chapman, who plays the Earl of Suffolk, reprised his role from Henry VI Part 1 and returns in Henry VI Part 3 and in Richard III as Lord Rivers, all in 1983. Ron Cook, who plays Richard Plantagenet, also played the third messenger and the Countess's porter in Henry VI Part 1, was elevated to Richard Duke of Gloucester in Henry VI Part 3, and became Richard III in Richard III, all in 1983. In addition, he also played Peter Simple in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 1982. Bernard Hill, who plays the Duke of York, also played the Master Gunner and the Duke of York in Henry VI Part 1, reprised his role as the Duke of York in Henry VI Part 3, and returns as the First Murderer and Sir William Brandon in Richard III, all in 1983. In addition, he also played Captain Smith in the 1997 blockbuster film Titanic. Brian Prothero, who plays Edward Plantagenet, also played the Bastard of Orleans, how would you like to have that nickname, in Henry VI Part 1, and becomes King Edward IV in Henry VI Part 3, as well as in Richard III, all in 1983. Frank Middlemass, who plays Cardinal Winchester, reprised his role from Henry VI Part 1 in 1983. He also played Pompey Bum in Measure for Measure in 1979 and the Fool in King Lear in 1982. David Pugh, who plays Peter Thumb, the second murderer and a townsman, also played a mayor's officer and a watchman of Rouen in Henry VI Part 1 in 1983. Tennille Evans, who plays the Earl of Salisbury, also played the Duke of Bedford, Edmund Mortimer, and a French general in Henry VI Part 1, various roles in Henry VI Part 3, and Lord Stanley in Richard III, all in 1983. He also played Sir Hugh Evans in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 1982. Derek Farr, who plays Lord Say, also played Sir William Lucy and the Earl of Salisbury in Henry VI Part 1, and Sir Robert Brackenbury and the Earl of Surrey in Richard III, all in 1983. Brian Deacon, who plays the Earl of Somerset, also played the same role in Henry VI Part 1, the Earl of Oxford in Henry VI Part 3, and several roles including Earl of Richmond in Richard III, all in 1983. Derek Fuke, who plays Simcox, played various roles in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3 and in Richard III, all in 1983. Angus McNamara, who plays young Clifford, also played various roles in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3 and Lord Lovell in Richard III, all in 1983. Mark Wing Davey, who plays the Earl of Warwick, plays several different roles in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3 and returned to Sir James Tyrrell in Richard III in 1983. Michael Byrne, who plays John Hume, also played other bit characters in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3, the Duke of Buckingham in Richard III, and Antonio and the Two Gentlemen of Verona, all in 1983. Arthur Cox, who plays Lord Clifford, played the Mayor of London and Sir John Fastolf in Henry VI Part 1, the Duke of Somerset in Henry VI Part 3, and Lord Grey and the Lord Mayor of London in Richard III, all in 1983. David Dacre, who plays the Duke of Buckingham, played Rainier, the Duke of Anjou, and Vernon in Henry VI Part 1, and returned as Lord Hastings in Henry VI Part 3 and in Richard III, all in 1983. Peter Wyatt, who plays Sir Humphrey Stafford, also played Woodville and a Lieutenant of the Tower in Henry VI Part 1, and the Duke of Norfolk in Henry VI Part 3 and in Richard III, all in 1983. Alex Gard, who plays the second Prentice, also played young John Talbot in Henry VI Part 1 and various characters including the Marquis of Dorset in Henry VI Part 3 and in Richard III, all in 1983. John Benfield, who plays various roles, is also in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3, playing the Earl of Northumberland, along with other roles. In addition, he also played the jailer in The Winter's Tale in 1981 and several roles in Titus Andronicus in 1985. Peter Aldwin, who plays the Second Company, also plays the role in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3 and in Richard III, all in 1983. He also played a British captain in Cymbeline in 1982. And finally, once again, Paul Jesson, who plays George Plantagenet, also played Clown in The Winter's Tale in 1981, Cloten in Cymbeline in 1982, multiple roles including the Second Messenger to the King and the Duke of Clarence in Henry VI Parts 1 and 3 and in Richard III, all in 1983, the First Citizen in Coriolanus in 1984, and Costard in Love's Labour's Lost in 1985. That means he's appeared in 8 different BBC Shakespeare plays, from my count, more than any other actor in the entire series. Now, let's get ready for today's trivia challenge, which is called I'll Give You the Last Word. Okay, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called I'll Give You the Last Word. Name the character who delivers the epilogue in each of the following plays. Number 1, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Number 2, As You Like It. And number 3, Pericles, Prince of Tyre. When we return, I'll have the answers for you, and we'll finish up with some relevant lessons from Henry VI Part 2. Okay, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called I'll Give You the Last Word. You were to name the character who delivers the epilogue in each of the following plays. Number 1, A Midsummer Night's Dream. That was Puck or Robin Goodfellow. Number 2, As You Like It. That was Rosalind. And number 3, Pericles, Prince of Tyre. That was Gower. Now let's finish up with some relevant lessons from Henry VI, Part 2. Number 1, never put your own needs ahead of your customers. Almost every single person in Henry VI's nobility was only interested in their own agendas. If you're a public servant, make sure that you're serving the best interest of your constituents. Next, make sure you surround yourself with people of good character. Remember that they are a reflection of who you are. If you're an employer, hire people based on their values and make sure they're compatible with yours. And finally, number 3, remember that pride goeth before a fall. Thomas Horner lost his bout with his apprentice Peter Thump because he was cocky and got drunk before his match. Even if you feel like you're in a position of advantage, you never want to flaunt it in front of your counterpart. This is especially true in negotiations. Just remember, in all things, be gracious. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when a man from Verona wants to settle down with a Paduan man's daughter who does nothing but frown.